Okay, so welcome back to the Mea Culpa podcast, my friend Tristan Snell. We have so much to talk about. There's so much going on. There's so much angst and anxiety, and I'm hoping that sometimes that this podcast can help to alleviate some of that, though I'm not so sure I actually ever accomplished that. And I want to start
Not your
by running
fault.
straight. That's for sure. I want to start with the topic that obviously I know a lot about. That's the Manhattan District Attorney, the Trump criminal case. And I want to ask you the following question. With President-elect Trump now set to return to the White House, what actually happens? I want your prognostication on what Judge Juan Merchan intends to do as it relates to this Manhattan DA criminal case, but also in conjunction with that, how does this affect its pursuit given Trump's renewed immunity claims as an incoming president, which of course was the result of the Supreme Court presidential immunity decision?
Yep. So, sad to say, I don't have a lot of hope here. I think that the likely outcome is going to be akin to what we saw happen at the DOJ level, where Jack Smith is standing down. Now, there, as I'm sure a lot of listeners know, listeners and viewers, the DOJ at the federal level has a standing policy that's existed since the 70s, stating that a sitting president cannot be indicted or prosecuted for crimes or for criminal offenses. I personally think that that's been misguided from the start, and that should never have been basically enshrined as DOJ policy. More than that, none of us have ever voted on that. No one in Congress ever voted on that. It's never been something that was actually publicly debated, and yet it's a policy that somehow we're all going to get stuck with. So that is going to get used to probably kill off the DOJ cases, the January 6th case and the documents case. I worry that either Merchan or the Manhattan DA's office itself will effectively say, well, if they can't prosecute a sitting president, neither can a state, neither can we. And that thereby they're just going to say, this is stayed pending his presidency, and that will be it for now.
Well, what we know is that the DA acknowledges that the sentencing should be stayed until 2029, which would be the end of the Trump administration period. However, they are still opposing the dismissal, which is something that Trump's counsel has requested. And the argument by the DA, as I read the document, is that we're not prosecuting a individual who is a president-elect that will be the president, right? All we're doing now is the sentencing. So the prosecution is already over. That trial took place. 12 independent jurors went ahead, made a determination of 34 counts of guilt. My feeling, and I've gotten some pretty bad slack from it, I was having a conversation with a journalist from Vanity Fair where I said, I think that they should dismiss the Manhattan DA case forthwith. And I say that not because of the way that the DA is posting the case, but rather more because of my respect for the office of the presidency. See, to me, it doesn't matter who the individual that will be the president is. It's the office of the presidency, to me, that is paramount. And it's the office of the presidency that will ultimately be speaking on behalf of all of us with our allies and our adversaries. And to have this shit hanging over an individual's head for 4 years, knowing that on the day that you leave in 4 years, you're going to get on Marine One, heading off to Air Force One to go to, in this case, probably Mar-a-Lago. And as soon as you get there, you're going to get handcuffed. And then you're going to have to show up to 100 Center Street here in New York in order for sentencing as an 83-year-old man, as a former president that just literally finished a 4-year administration. What do you think somebody like Donald Trump will do over the course of the 4 years? He will look to bury this shit and everything in its path in order to make sure that there's no accountability. As far as I'm concerned, the guy beat the odds 1,000,000,000 that Donald Trump was going to end up being president again, that he was going to get the nomination, that he was going to ultimately win and get not just a win here, but a win with the Supreme Court. It's like 1,000,000,000. As far as I'm concerned, let it go. He won.
Yeah, I think I have to respectfully disagree there because of the fact that the sentencing already happened. Even if you go along
Sentencing
with,
didn't happen. The case happened.
well, sorry, the conviction happened, but the
Right.
conviction happened, right? The jury already rendered its decision,
Yep.
and all of the actions that occurred here were actions of a private citizen. They were not actions of a president. So the
Agreed.
immunity, and if you want to litigate whether the immunity decision wipes out the convictions, go ahead and litigate that. I feel like that's a winning argument to make, that immunity decision does not get rid of that conviction. But my feeling is that you can't have a situation where the individual passes out of that office, which I also have a great deal of respect for. They are not in that office. They commit crimes. They go into that office. They come back out of it. They get convicted. Then they go back into that office, and that somehow just sort of washes them clean and renders them completely immune. My feeling is that you do not want to impair the office of the presidency, but that's also why, and I know I should play a game here of be careful what you wish for. You're not impairing the office, you're impairing that person. And we have a procedure in place for that. It's the 25th Amendment. It's the rest of the constitutional provisions that allow for a vice president. If he gets sentenced and then he is supposed to report to prison, that means he no longer can hold the office. The office doesn't die. The office doesn't go away. The office isn't impaired. There's somebody there to take the office. It's the vice president. So in my view, I don't believe that this should be the end of this prosecution. I do, however, think that it will be. I think this is effectively done. We just don't know exactly the niceties of how it's going to be done.
What it does mean is that Donald Trump is a felon. You see,
if
they dismiss the case,
if they dismiss it, then he's no longer
not a felon.
Yeah, that's
if
right.
in fact they hold it off, the sentencing for the 4 years, he's no longer considered a felon either. The felony nomenclature, I guess, that only becomes effective after sentencing. Right now, he's just somebody who's been convicted, but he's not a felon. Convicted. The probation would actually hold the felony title.
It would be a very, very small victory, not even almost to not exist. But you're right. I mean, there is something in that, but it's not, of course, what any of us were hoping for or expecting.
Yeah, and I mean, look, I can tell you that I don't think the DA handled this all too well. I think that they started the process late, knowing how Trump is the king of legal delays.
Mm-hmm.
They allowed the delays and delays and delays to a
They got
point.
played. They got played.
Boy, did they ever. So let me ask you this thing. He sure did. Like a horrible fiddle. Not even a good fiddle. Wasn't even a good song.
No. $2 violin at a yard sale. That's how he played them.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, don't say that. I heard that there was a guy who bought a $2 violin that turned out to be a Stradivarius. So let's.
I don't know if that was the case here.
Yeah, probably not. So let me ask you this then: how significant is the risk that Trump's new administration will seek to undermine the Manhattan DA's efforts through federal pressure or through further legal maneuvers? Because we know the people that he's intending to put into these cabinet positions. What could they actually do if they are ultimately given their cabinet positions? What kind of pressure could they? Yeah, if they're confirmed, what kind of pressure could they exert?
I mean, the kicker is that the pressure that Trump could assert on any state or local authority is really about money, right? he could try to do, but he can't even do that really quite alone because it's also about congressional appropriations. Like the power that the presidency has over state and local officials is overwhelmingly about giving or withholding federal funds. And the kicker there, though, is that New York is actually a net producer of income to the federal government, not a net taker of income from the federal government. So I don't know if New York's really that worried about that. There are some, look, we can imagine all sorts of really horrible scenarios of of state of emergency, martial law, things like that, which are insanely not outside the realm of possibility here, but let's just put those aside. In terms of much more sort of garden variety, but abusive things that Trump can do to the Manhattan DA, there's not a lot there, which is that's, I guess, the good news. But he's not going to need to do that because I think they're all just going to stand down without putting up much of a fight. And Jack Smith is going to do the same thing too.
Jack Smith is a totally different scenario because it's federal. And
it is federal, but I don't think they should be standing down. I think he should be standing up and making Trump fire him. That's what I think. But but that's the problem, is that the DOJ memo, would say otherwise, and thereby he's just going to stand down. I think there's an argument there that once you indicted him, once those wheels were turning because of the indictment, it should continue.
Yeah.
That you shouldn't be indicting a sitting president, but if you indict a private citizen who happens to become president, that doesn't automatically give them a get out of jail free card. That would be my position, but I don't run DOJ, so there.
Right. Makes two of us. So let me ask you, because very soon we know who will potentially be running the DOJ.
Ooh.
And my question to you,
I don't think so, though.
Well, my question to you then is this, right? Because Trump has, since day number one, portrayed these charges as politically motivated. It's a witch hunt, right? First of all, what impact do you think that his victory, his re-election victory, has on the public's trust now in the entire judicial process? You see, I think that his victory basically substantiates his claim, at least in the mind of at least those that voted for him, that this case was bullshit, that, look, they can't even, after a jury of 12 convicts him. I mean, this was the biggest news of all time. I mean, the first time a former president and now a president-elect has been found guilty of 34 criminal counts. And he's constantly, since day number one, ever, right? This is the first time ever he turns around and now he's saying, I told you it was a witch hunt. I told you it was a witch hunt. And those people that voted for him are like, maybe it was a witch hunt.
I think you are, I think it's about like what the percentages are there. I mean, obviously his hardcore supporters never thought that any of that was legitimate. Now they've been confirmed in that. Are some of the other people who are supporters but not hardcore MAGA now probably thinking that all of that was garbage? I think maybe. I think you probably are right there. Do we now have a majority of Americans who believe that none of that was legitimate? I don't know about that. I imagine someone might poll that, but sadly, with all of this ending with not a bang but a whimper, I'm not really sure that anyone's going to bother to poll it, because it's just going to be gone. It's going to be water under the bridge, and it's going to be a weird episode in American history that may get written about or may not if the Trumpers get to write the history. Or they do, it'll be just a minor footnote about how they tried to persecute us. I think that already, put it this way, I would actually throw it back the other way to you, Michael. I think that this probably did even more damage to how pro-democracy, pro-rule of law folks like us are viewing the system, which already for you and I was already pretty low. Like we already had a lot of doubts about the system and its ability to do anything. I think that's now just got to be absolutely crushed.
You know how many times, Tristan, you've heard me say in our personal conversations as well as here on Mea Culpa that I believe that there are multiple tiers of law depending upon who you are. And I always reflect back to the improper prosecution of me from the very beginning after the FBI raid, first time offender. I have one speeding ticket my entire life. That is my interaction with law enforcement.
I think I have 3 or 4.
One
Yeah,
in
that's good.
it was 1985. I was driving back from New York to Washington, D.C., and I had just gotten myself a car, and I was probably going maybe 15 miles an hour over the speed limit. I wasn't doing 100. I think I was doing at the time maybe 75 and a 60. And they pulled me over. That's my one and only interaction ever with law enforcement. I've never had an issue with the IRS. In fact, I've never filed a late tax return until 2017. And I've been filing my taxes since maybe 1988, something like that, 89, right? I've never filed the late, I've never asked for an extension. I've always had a CPA. I gave my CPA every single bank record, which showed every single deposit, but yet they charged me with tax evasion. Now, I want to be clear about something. I have never argued and said that the underlying facts of that case are not accurate, meaning that there was a mistake in the tax. I just don't think I should have been prosecuted. I never received a letter from the IRS that said, hey, there's an issue with your tax return, right?
That is a fine 99,999 times out of a million, right? Like that's a fine.
Yep.
Yeah.
For me, it became mine went from what would have been a letter, and you get to sit down with your accountant or your lawyer and with an IRS agent.
Write a check.
Not me. No, not me.
No.
And by the way, I paid the error before sentencing. As soon as they told me what the error was, I was like, oh my God, okay, I didn't steal anybody's money. I had the money sitting in the bank, so I paid it. But me, no. 5 counts of tax evasion, which, by the way, wipes you out because they charge you 2% per month interest, which is compounded going back 5 years. You know, I mean, it's better than being the mob. My point on all of this is that I think Bragg made a terrible mistake in the delay. Mark Pomerantz was actually accurate. He was accurate when he said we need to file it now. In fact, if they would have filed it when Pomerantz said so, or shortly thereafter, this matter, we would now.
It might have gone differently.
It would have. Not only
it might have gone differently. It might be on appeal right now, and it might still get killed because he wouldn't actually be in prison yet. It would be pending appeal, but it would have been further along. And the thing is, we'll never know. Like if we had that year back, we'll never know now.
Right. But what they could have done is they could have sentenced him and incarcerated him pending appeal.
They could have. I don't know that they ever would have, but you're right. You're right.
Okay, but they could have. I know 10 guys that were with me at Otisville that,
of course,
that
happens every day.
And of course it does. And if everybody is treated equally, that's what would have happened. But so many things fell in line for Trump that we're lucky for him, and with his delay tactics was simply in a position to basically show you that there are multiple laws depending upon who you are. The way that the law treats you depends upon who you are.
And that overall, I think that the system is just incapable of dealing with somebody like Trump. And there are just deeper problems with our system. Look, yeah, you're right. Because look, when they really want to go after somebody, they go and they do this all the time. Right. And then they get to somebody like him, and it's like, look, Jeffrey Epstein escaped justice. One way or another. We'll still never know what the hell happened there. I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, but what people need to remember is that he was prosecuted a time before that down in Florida, and he got off the hook. And you see what's going on with, say, like the Bill Cosby case, where Cosby's actually back out of prison again because there have been so many issues with that case. Our system is just not capable of handling these kind of cases very well. It's really bad at it. As soon as you have somebody that has enough wealth and power and ability to generate publicity for themselves, they can tie up things forever, and our system is not good enough at being able to forge ahead and actually like get these things done faster. And then it compounds the problem if you then on top of that have what I sort of refer to again as kind of political timidity. You have some sort of excessive caution of like the folks in charge, that they're like not quite willing to go all in to make the case, and they hesitate. And that's what happened with Bragg, and that's what happened with Merrick Garland. And now we see the result.
And that's why folks like Tom McKay, the prosecutor, and Nicholas Roos, why they went ahead and what they said is you have 48 hours from a Friday at 5:30 p.m. in my case. You have till Monday, 9 a.m. to come in and plead guilty, or we file an 80-page indictment that includes your wife. All right?
Right.
You know, they hit my Achilles
That's what they
heel.
do when they want to. That's what they do when they want to, when they're motivated to do so, and they don't think there's going to be any blowback. Right? That's the thing, is that at the end of the day, they're scared of the blowback if they go hard at somebody like Trump. But because they didn't, now we are where we are. And you raised a different point before, which I also think is worth mentioning. And it has to do a lot with what I think is the conventional wisdom of kind of the DC, New York, power axis, is that there was this weak, complacent, conventional wisdom in place all through kind of the 21, 22, 23 timeframe that, oh yeah, Trump's done. Trump's played out. He's not going to be back. It's going to be DeSantis. People just assumed that he would be done. And that was a dangerous, just fatal assumption to make.
You got to give
our
him
system
the credit
and
where
the establishment
credit is
and the elites. They screwed it up.
Yep. You really have to give the guy credit. 2 impeachments, 4 indictments, a civil case for $500 million, a civil case for 100 with E. Jean Carroll.
That's not over. Those aren't over. I think those actually might live.
And the guy is still standing. And the guy's still standing. And not only is he standing, he's soon to return as president of the United States. It's truly a hell of a fucking story. I mean, if somebody wrote this in a book, you would call it dystopia. One last thing about Alvin Bragg. My concern, or at least a thought, is, Trump has made it crystal clear that he intends to investigate the investigators. And if, in fact, he gets his attorney general, that he wants and so on, what do you think the likelihood is that there will be investigations into Alvin Bragg or Tish James with the attorney, our New York attorney general? And also, what does that end up doing to them?
This is where we start getting into questions of exactly, how far over the Rubicon is Trump going to go here? How imperial and dictatorial is he going to get? I don't think that we want to underestimate what he could do here. That kind of just like ad hominem abuse of power to go after prosecutors, to go after potentially judges. I don't think we can rule any of that out. That could, that would be completely unprecedented, right? It's revenge.
How Donald Trump weaponized the United States Department of Justice against his critics. If anybody thinks that this is not something that's in his Rubicon, you would be making a terrible, terrible mistake.
I think, and the thing is, like, do we have what we already know is there's no way there's ever going to be, the press is never going to then stop and say, this is beyond the pale. This is something you cannot do. You're never going to see that happen with him. They've never thrown up that guardrail against him ever. Is it something that you could actually get a judge to throw out? That's really going to be, if I'm gaming it out just off the cuff here, if say one of them, Bragg or James, gets subpoenaed and that there's suddenly a DOJ investigation into them, you then can move to quash a subpoena. So this, potentially they could go to that federal judge and say, this is crazy. You can't do this.
Right.
And then also those officials have immunity of their own. But what
if the judge is like an Eileen Cannon or some of the judges that they're federal court judges that they're choosing, like in Texas? Now what?
It's true. It's true, but you wouldn't have venue there. So, I mean, it's how many of these rules does he break? Obviously, there's no limit to how many rules he could break if he really, really wants to. But both of those people are in New York. Their offices are in Manhattan. He has to do this in the Southern District.
Okay.
And he does, and I don't know if he's got anybody on the Southern District who is going to be willing to go that far for him, that they're going to uphold a subpoena against a sitting prosecutor. And that also those folks there is a doctrine of immunity for those folks, especially when they're in office and even after, that goes for a lot of law enforcement officials. That has often been an issue when it comes to going after, predatory police officers and things like that. It could actually work in the favor of these prosecutors being able to fend that off. Again, I'm not trying to be overly optimistic about how this could go, but I do believe that it would not be frictionless for him to go after this, and there could still be some checks on him there. Then the next thing is, does he just defy a federal court order? Which, by the way, there's going to be a bunch of those coming up. This administration is going to get sued a ton. When those injunctions come, is the executive branch actually going to heed them the way that every other executive branch has throughout American history?
Right. I also just want to mention, of course, that Trump is the one, his administration will be choosing who is going to be running the Southern District of New York. So it's not as if
the prosecutor's office. That's right.
That's right.
Yes.
So you can't turn around and say that there's no chance that they will be doing it. Plus, the immunity does not go if, in fact, that there's malice or fraud that's attached to it. That immunity clause, I think, gets wiped out. So who knows how far he intends to push this? But if history repeats itself and it shows you just one thing, I like how you start hearing all of these folks turning around and talking about Byron Donalds turns around the other day on TV and he's talking about how Biden weaponized the Department of Justice through Merrick Garland, within which to go after Donald Trump, which is what I was talking about before when we were talking about public trust in the judicial process, when in fact the one who actually weaponized the Department of Justice for a first-time impression was Bill Barr in the unconstitutional remand of me off of a counterfeit document that they knew was violative of my First Amendment, that a federal court judge turned around and acknowledged it was retaliatory. By the way, as did the judge in the Bivens case that I brought, and so did the appellate court. But unfortunately, due to the Supreme Court's ruling, there was no action for damages against these individuals, which, again, I think is totally unfair. But I want to move on for a second, and I want to talk to you about something which is, of course, just all over the news and has been for the last couple of days, and that's these various nominations. When you have, for example, we'll start with Pete Hegseth, right? So President-elect Trump, has, nominated Pete Hegseth for a pretty prominent cabinet role, right?
Just a little.
Despite all of his past controversies, including what's now coming out, these alleged connections to not just right-wing extremist rhetoric, but also some sexual allegations that took place. My question to you is really, what does this choice signal about this incoming administration's priorities?
Look, there's a couple of things going on here. One of them is that, as somebody else online said the other day, if you realize that Trump is not picking people to run these agencies, but to destroy them, it all makes a lot more sense. It's also just literally that I think the world around him has continued to kind of shrink, and he's just got fewer and fewer people that are anywhere near his orbit. At the end of the day, this is really about loyalty and control. Who are the people that he can actually tap that will do his bidding? I think that's the biggest thing that's going on here, is that he's finding people. And I actually think there's maybe a strategy here, weirdly, in his little twisted brain, that he's picking people that this time around, he is specifically almost going after people who have some sort of deep flaw, because it's that much more likely that he can control them. Then he's going to be able to say, I made you and I can unmake you. If he can actually force some of these people into office, they're going to owe him everything, and they'll do everything for him. So I think that it's not really, I actually wonder here if all of these folks with these allegations against them, there's also, there have been allegations in the past against Linda McMahon for enabling sexual abuse of underage individuals. Obviously, there's all the stuff with Matt Gaetz. There's a look here that says this isn't a bug, it's a feature. He's actually looking for people that have something that have some issue, so that he can be the one to make them, and then he has total control over them. I don't think that's a crazy, view of this at all.
Yeah, but look, to me, I don't understand some of these picks. I don't understand this transition team. I remember very clearly in 2016 when Trump won, there was no transition team. It was Jared was running around with a photocopy, giving it to everybody. Hey, who do you think we should put in as the ambassador to the Court of St. James? Who do you think that should be, the chief of staff? Who do you think should be this or that? And everybody who was around him in his inner circle was doing that. This time they actually had a more organized transition team, but I don't understand what this transition team is doing. Did they not vet any of these? Are they not aware of Hegseth's controversial background? Because, look, whether you like Trump or you don't, and a lot of people have sort of gotten angry at me or disappointed, and I don't really care because, like Mea Culpa says at the bottom there, nothing but the truth. I'm going to give you the truth, even if it doesn't get you off, right? Trump is going to be our 47th president come January 20th of 2025. Whether you like him or you despise him, this guy is going to be, and it's going to be covered on every fucking television station across the world. He's going to have his hand on his Trumpy Bible, and he's going to be sworn in.
That he's never read.
Yeah. All right. He's going to be sworn in as the 47th president of the United States. So fucking get used to it. The question for all of us is, what do we do
to
ensure that these folks don't run amok over our constitutional rights? And coming from somebody who's had their First Amendment constitutional right, their Fourth Amendment constitutional right, and their Eighth Amendment constitutional right violated by the early administration, by Bill Barr and the DOJ. I am warning each and every one of my listeners. I am warning the people who I talk to when I'm on television, to their viewership, that this is not out of the question. My hope and my prayer is that he doesn't do a retake of the first term, that in fact they try to become more measured. The problem is when you look to see who that they're nominating, it certainly doesn't seem like that's the intent. And it is nerve-wracking.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, so you point out the other possibility, which is probably the simpler one, which is just they just dropped the ball and didn't realize that these folks had these problems. But I think the counter to that is, like, everybody knew about Gaetz, though. This Hegseth stuff, I think some people knew about it, but it wasn't that widely reported. The Gaetz stuff has been very widely reported. He avoided getting indicted for that sex trafficking of a minor that he's been accused of by the skin of his teeth. And I still want to know what the heck happened there, because all reports were that they were closing in on doing an indictment there. They're trying to see if they could actually get him to plea. And then they dropped it. And this was the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Middle District of Florida in Orlando. We still don't know what happened there. The guy who was with him for all of that stuff, his wingman, his pimp,
Joel Greenberg,
got imprisoned for this stuff, and yet Gaetz skated. So they knew about Gates. They put him up anyway. So I still stick with my position that they're actually finding people that have some sort of like awful flaw, so that it's unquestionable that he's got them under his thumb, that these people are going to be unquestionably loyal to him, that they'll do whatever the heck he wants. And then, the other people that are around him in the White House that I think are going to be doing a lot of the like heavy lifting when it comes to this stuff, like say Stephen Miller, are going to be, and maybe Musk, if they don't have a falling out before then, which I actually think they will. I'd actually love to get your take on that, about like how long Musk is going to stick around in Trump's inner circle, with that clash of egos. But I think that he's picking a lot of people that I think we have to be worried about a lot of extremist behavior, a lot of attempts to do an end around the Constitution and other federal law. And he's putting people in there that are going to completely owe him and be completely loyal to him.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, what could be better for our democratic republic?
Oh yeah, that's going to be wonderful.
The thing that I'm sort of disappointed in is, and maybe I'm just being hopeful and unrealistic. My hope was that by putting in proper people this time, that you would actually start to create bipartisan support for this upcoming administration with some of the initiatives that he's talking about. Like I fully support stronger borders for better immigration. I'm not so sure I agree with the method that Tom Homan is discussing about this mass deportation, roundups and so on, 10 million people, which is an unfeasible number. Look, let's be clear. Your schedule is busy, and sometimes intimate moments happen spontaneously, or you hope. I mean, you don't have the time to go to doctor's office and get treated for things like ED. Through HIMSS, you can get a personalized ED treatment without stepping foot outside your door. HIMSS is changing men's health care by providing access to affordable sexual health treatments, all from the comfort of your couch. HIMSS provides access to a range of doctor-trusted ED treatments such as chewable hard mints, proven treatments like Viagra and Cialis or their generics for up to 95% cheaper. You hear that? 95% cheaper. And the process is simple, and it's 100% online. There's no uncomfortable doctor visits. Just answer a series of questions on their website, and a medical provider will determine the right treatment option. And if prescribed your medication, well, it ships directly to you for free. And no insurance is needed. You pay one low price for your treatments, online visits, ongoing shipments, and provider messaging. HIMSS has hundreds of thousands of trusted subscribers. So if ED is getting you down, it's time you find the option that works right for you. So start your free online visit today at hims.com/Cohen. That's HIMS.com/Cohen for your personalized ED treatment options. hims.com/Cohen. And the products mentioned are chewable compounded products which are not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required, and price varies based on product and subscription plan. In fact, my concern about the vitriolic rhetoric around the mass deportation is with a country, United States of America, that has what? 400 million firearms in the hands of civilians? What do you think happens when you try to go after 10 million people and they're rounding them up to send them back to, for example, Guatemala, where their kids got sliced to death with machetes, or their wife is missing her left hand because the gangs there cut her hand off, right? Because she took, 2 ounces more of rice than she was supposed to, right? Or that she wasn't making, the drugs fast enough. I mean, this is very, very dangerous, especially when you have a military with a police force that only amounts to 2 million. So you're outnumbered, outmanned, outgunned 5-1. To me, this is a disaster waiting to happen. I really was hoping that there would be bipartisan support for some of these initiatives, but like with the criticisms that are coming out and the people that are being nominated, I just don't see it happening.
I don't see that. And I think the question's going to be that when all of the rhetoric and all of the proposals of all of the Project 2025 and Agenda 47 and all of his other rhetoric and his speeches and his rallies, and all of a sudden you bring that campaign apparatus, which is a lot of talk. Now, there's a lot of danger in that, but it's a lot of talk. And then you wheel that back into Washington, D.C. with all of its power centers and other egos and laws and institutions. What's going to happen? And I do think that there's a certain amount of inertia with Washington that has thwarted well-intentioned, ambitious presidents. And and then maybe I hope this ends up not being a naive hope, but I do have a feeling that there's going to be some problem that he'll have with being able to get some of the things that he wants to get done. But also, we've got to fight it. We can't just wait for other people in DC to do their jobs. We have to be out there advocating for, hey, guess what? If you take a lawless executive action, there's this thing called the Administrative Procedure Act that allows you to challenge it and get it set aside by a federal judge. Congress is going to have to approve a lot of these things that Trump wants to do. The president doesn't have the ability to get rid of a federal agency. The president doesn't have the ability necessarily to do all of the things that he wants to do with immigration. The law that almost got passed last year, but Trump killed it on Capitol Hill, the Republican legislation that the Democrats ended up signing off on, and then Trump turned around and killed their own bill. That's still on the table. So there's a possibility there for bipartisan, stronger border bill. They could just take that same bill and run it through the next Congress.
You're talking about Senator Langford's bill.
Right. That bill is still there and could be passed and would actually do a lot of good for strengthening the border, as a lot of people want to do. But is Trump even once he's in, is Trump going to support that bill? Or is he going to say, no, that's not enough. I'm going forward with what he wants to do, just to be clear for everybody, and I'm sure you've been talking about this, is that they want to actually say, detain the people first with no due process, and then and deport them, and they don't even get a hearing. That's not how the laws work. That's not how our system works. They're supposed to have some kind of due process before they get removed from the country. That's how the immigration system works. And I realize it's not working in a lot of instances right now. It's underfunded, it's outmaneuvered, it's overwhelmed. I get all of that, but the solution is not to say, nope, round them up, stick them in a tent city, and send them back by gunpoint.
No, I hate to say it, Tristan. You and I are going to disagree on this one, because that's exactly what he's going to do.
No, I think he is going to do it.
It's going to be the first bill that comes out of his administration is the mass deportation bill. It was a pledge that he made to his supporters. It's a pledge that probably propelled him into the White House. And you know what? He wants to show himself as being the tough president that he said that he was going to be. They're then going to go on television. They're going to talk about how much money the United States is going to be saving by deporting all of these illegal migrants, these drug dealers, these murderers, these mental cases, these thugs, all of the various different rhetoric that he has described them. And I think it's going to be one hell of a chaotic beginning of this administration.
So you think there's enough votes in Congress to get that passed?
I don't think he's even thinking about Congress at this point.
I think he needs to. That's the problem.
I think he's going to do it by executive order, and he's going to shove it right down everybody's throat. What everybody keeps talking about is process, but historical process. Every president before him has turned around and they have followed processes that have existed for 249 years. And Trump is saying those processes, and the plurality of Americans agree with him on this, which is how he got back into the White House, that these processes are flawed, that the president has to be able to run the country like you run your private business. He would never turn around and say during the times that I was working for him, hey, let's all have a vote on whether we should buy X, Y, or Z property.
Right.
He makes those executive decisions.
Right.
And look, I'm not the one who said it. He's the one who said it, that on day one, he wants to rewrite the Constitution. He wants to get rid of the legislative branch and the judiciary and confer all power to the executive branch, namely the chief executive himself, because it is too difficult to have to deal with Congress, too difficult to have to deal with the bullshit lawsuits for the president to be effective. And a plurality of Americans agree with this shit. In essence, making the president into, assuming that they ever leave, a termed king.
Right. I mean, I think that, look, I think the risk factor there is, does he declare a state of emergency? He's already hinted that he will, and that then he's going to say he effectively gets to suspend any other normal civil law processes, and he'll claim that he has some martial law power. And then, look, he could drive this straight to an initial crisis within the first month or two of the administration if he goes completely dictatorial. If he declares a state of emergency, and then he really states that that's what he's doing, and then the only institution at that point that potentially stops him is the Supreme Court, and does he listen? And does the Supreme Court go along with it? Do they go along with it? I mean, look, I don't believe that there's enough complete crazy on the court to say that you get to just declare a state of emergency just because you came into office and inherited an existing, look, the situation on the border is not good. Nobody thinks it is. But to state that, like, oh, now I'm going to declare that to be a state of emergency. State of emergency is supposed to be for, like, the Civil War. It's supposed to be for, like, declaring a localized state of emergency for, like, a major natural disaster. Is the Supreme Court actually going to go along with it for that? If they do, God help us. I mean, that's very much true. But I think that I'm not saying that I necessarily think that the courts and Congress are going to necessarily do the right thing, but I am saying that that's where the next battles are going to get fought. You're going to see whether or not some of these things get passed through Congress, and you're going to see whether or not some of these actions get challenged through the courts, make their way up to SCOTUS. By the way, that appeals process could take years for a lot of these actions that he wants to take. Does he actually follow a court order in the meantime? Does it get to SCOTUS? What do they do with it? Those are going to be the things that we look out for.
Well, I think that the only thing that will ultimately, I don't believe in Congress, especially since he will control the House and the Senate. I don't have any faith whatsoever in the Supreme Court or the court system at all. I just don't. As somebody who's been abused by it,
right?
The fact that even the Supreme Court turned down my writ of certiorari, that people like Lawrence Tribe, who's probably the most prolific constitutional attorney in the country right now, turned around and said that they should take this case. It's like another Plessy versus Ferguson type matter, right? I mean, you're talking about guys like John Dean and Nick Ackerman saying the same thing, that of course the Supreme Court should hear it. It is, you've become the first political prisoner ever held by this country for refusing to waive their First Amendment constitutional right. How could they not? Anyway, let me just move on for a second. I want to talk to you again, since we're talking about Matt Gaetz, right? I mean, obviously with Trump's selection of Matt Gaetz for Attorney General, despite all of the unresolved ethics reports, how do you think that this, again, shapes the public's view of what Trump and his Justice Department will look like and what they're actually looking to accomplish?
You know, I I have to imagine that this is not exactly doing great things for folks, even some folks who voted for Trump. I know it's not going to collapse his support. Of course not. Nothing seems to ever. But I do have to believe that there are some people who are looking at this and being like, how can you, like, this guy? This is the best you could do. You know, in terms of like, this is not a high quality individual. It's not someone who's qualified to be there, and he's not morally qualified to be there at all in any way, shape, or form. So how could this be true? What it says is just it's a total devaluation of the whole system. So yeah, I mean, it sends a very strong signal that it's just going to be no. He wants to use it as a personal fiefdom to protect himself. That's what he's looking to do. You know, he put his own recently. He put his own recent criminal defense attorneys in a couple of the other top spots there.
Deputy Attorney
right?
General and
he's going to nominate them for those roles, right? That's who he is choosing for those roles. So he literally is just taking his personal legal apparatus and moving it over into DOJ. And that was already after he, really had Bill Barr do his bidding all the way up until the very, very end of the administration now I don't know we'll ever know the whole story, but it's very clear from what we've been able to know that Trump tried to get Barr to go along with the whole January 6th conspiracy, and Barr said that was a bridge too far. I'm not going to give Barr much credit because he doesn't deserve it.
But, right. None at all, in my opinion.
None at all. But he's going even further this time to make sure that he's not even going to have a Bill Barr this time. He's just going to go straight for no qualifications, pure loyalty. This is a crony cabinet. This is a crony administration. And that starts to look a heck of a lot more like some sort of developing world scenario, right? Or something out of obviously Russia or Hungary these days. That's what it looks like. It's purely loyalty. It has nothing to do with qualifications. No, this is going to corrode everybody's trust even further, but that plays right into their hands because at the end of the day, what they want is more corrosion and more chaos, because what they really want is to break the whole thing apart, peel off chunks of the federal government to enrich themselves, and just crater the whole system. I do believe that that's ultimately the goal of a lot of the people that are around Trump. I think it's become Trump's goal too.
Sure. Now, you said something which I thought was interesting, that, Matt Gaetz is not qualified to be Attorney General,
right,
and so on. It's interesting, though, because he's a multiple-termed member of Congress. So just think about that statement. He's okay to be a member of Congress, right?
Yeah.
One of our elected leaders,
yes.
But he's not okay to be the Attorney General. It is sort of an interesting thought, isn't it?
I mean, if you get a district that wants to put a certain person up, then there you go. They're going to put a certain person up. I mean, it's the kicker, though, is that just for a minute, like, put aside all of the allegations against Gaetz for a moment. Under normal circumstances, Gaetz would never get put up, even being a multi-term member of Congress, because he doesn't actually have the experience necessary for the job. Matt Gaetz is a lawyer, but he only practiced law for 2 years at a law firm. And, he's been a member of Congress. That doesn't qualify you to be Attorney General and to run DOJ. He never worked at DOJ. How can he be qualified to run? He never worked there a day in his life. You could probably go back a long, long way before you would find another Attorney General of either party who had no prosecutorial experience whatsoever. Just none. He's never prosecuted anything a day in his life. Matt Gaetz's biggest experience with prosecutors is sitting on the other side of the table from them as a criminal suspect.
Interesting.
That's his only experience, was getting off the hook in Florida for all of this sex trafficking stuff. And the drugs and the bribery allegations and a whole lot else.
Sure. So let me ask you this then. You think that the House Ethics Committee should release the report on him now that 100%. Even though he resigned from Congress?
It doesn't
Or
matter. In my view, the American people have a right to know what happened with one of their elected representatives. It should be released.
tell me why, considering that ethics report was for Congress, in order to determine whether or not he could remain as a member of Congress. So therefore, by his resignation, shouldn't it? And I'm just playing both sides of the coin here. My opinion is, if the process is that it was done in order to determine if he violated any congressional ethics rules, like what what's his name, Santos did, and then he resigns, shouldn't that moot the need for the release or any further investigation on that report?
I still stand on the principle of transparency here, that we deserve to know. It's the people's house. We deserve to know what happened with a member of that house. But I think the other thing that, I'm just going to talk off the cuff here, and I think that then, people will, I'm sure, look into this after this airs, and I'm going to look it up after, is if it's possible that expelling him, a vote to expel him, would permanently bar him from taking a seat in the House again. And that there is something to that, to say, like, look, that's it. You're out. You can't come back. You cannot come back as a member of this body, that he would be permanently expelled from holding a seat in the House of Representatives. So in my view, and look, maybe I guess the counter argument to that is, well, then release the port then if he's actually coming back. But in my view, I think that the people of his district also have a right to know what the heck was going on with him, so that they can make a determination as to whether or not to put him back into office next year, which they may be called upon to do.
Yeah. Look, Tristan, just one last thing. Obviously, we have, because the hour goes by just too quickly. I've got a million more questions that I would ask you. You're a guy who actually held Trump accountable in the Trump University case, something that many people, especially listening, are aware of. One of the concerns that I have is all of the delays and all of the fuck ups that have taken place over the course of the past few years. I think it basically diminishes, again, the Justice Department and people's confidence. Take a look, for example, at the Fani Willis case, right? I mean, that case is on a permanent hold. So there was a motion. The judge just ultimately decided that, what, they marked it off calendar, which nobody even understands why. You had Judge Eileen Cannon throwing all sorts of roadblocks up in that case. You now have Jack Smith, who's going to step aside because they know that the DOJ under the Trump administration cannot, as you advised, that they cannot, pursue claims against the sitting president based on that memo. Got to turn around and you got to say that this really erodes, or should erode, people's confidence in legitimately how our legal system works.
Oh, 100%. I mean, we are now at a place where, as doubtful as a lot of people were about the efficacy and justice of the justice system, I mean, it's now just going to crater entirely. And again, unfortunately, this plays right into the hands of the wrecking ball crew that's coming to Washington, where the worse everything functions, the worse people think about government, the more lightly they're going to treat their vote. They're going to keep putting people like Trump into office, or people like Matt Gaetz into Congress, and they're going to keep getting poor results, and the whole thing's going to spiral. And it's to the benefit of the people that are trying to do the wrecking, because ultimately, but that's where we're at. Like it's a very, very, very bad situation. We had an opportunity the past couple of years to restore people's faith in our system, and by and large, we blew it. Yeah. And we're going to have to figure out where we pick that back up. But it's going to be a lot of work.
Agreed. There's only one of two scenarios here. One, as you just said, it becomes a total shit show and it spirals us into additional chaos, where ultimately the country says, you know what? And because we've seen this historically, the midterms will ultimately put Democrats in the House and the Senate, and then Trump will become a lame duck, and then it's going to be a lot of fighting with executive orders and so on, as we discussed early before. Or imagine this. What if he's right? What if he's right that the chaos, that the incompetent, or at least on paper, those that don't appear to have that they shouldn't have been offered the job. What if hypothetically everything goes right? Basically, Trump will now have changed the way America operates for eternity.
I mean, I think the problem is that he's going to change it. There's no doubt that the government at every level needs a lot of reform. There are a lot of things that need to change, but the solution to it is not to then just hand even more power to the presidency and let him operate as an elected or possibly not elected dictator, right? And then what happens then? Does he actually try to run for a third term? Do you see,
Yes.
I think possibly, and then, or do you see Don Jr. run in his place, or Tucker Carlson? Like, where does this end? And, in my view, in my lifetime, we've already seen enough continued slide toward a more imperial presidency. It's a really, really bad problem overall. I feel like Congress needs to stand up for itself a lot more than it does.
Or they lose their power completely.
Or it's it. I mean, that's it. That's the thing. Every time that they just let the president do whatever he wants, they're making themselves more and more irrelevant. Mm-hmm. They're going to have to take a stand in the next couple of years, or there just won't be a Congress. I think that's really the threat that we all have to worry about. And we're going to have to educate people as to, look, there's probably a lot of people in this country who would be like, well, what would that be a problem about? And it's like, we're going to have to actually educate people as to why that is a problem. Then you have one person whose arbitrary decisions just get to run wild. That's the very thing that we revolted against 250 years ago in the first place. But, whatever. This is a very, very bad situation. But yeah, they're using people's disillusionment and jadedness with the government as an excuse to make the government even worse. And it is a spiral. And I think that we've got to have a reckoning here where we can stop some of the damage. And we're going to have to start rebuilding, even if it's at places in the state level, like particular AG's offices, whatever, to say, no, the rule of law is going to happen. You're going to actually see these prosecutions go through and have checks on these powerful figures, regardless of their positions.
Tristan, thank you so much for joining me. Hope to see you again very, very soon, because it appears there's going to be, unfortunately, a lot more to be talking about.
Sadly, yep.
See you soon, pal.
Take care.